Hi, everybody. It's absolutely wonderful to be here to celebrate Victoria and to celebrate poetry, I think in general is very important. So I'm just going to briefly introduce Victoria and then talk a tiny bit about the collection and then invite Victoria to read from Eggshell. So as Jazz said, there'll be time and the end for everyone to put in their questions and comments, and we look forward to hearing from you all. So Victoria Kennefick grew up in Cork and lives in Kerry. Her debut collection, Eat or We Both Starve, published by Carcanet Press in 2021, won the Seamus Heaney First Collection Poetry Prize and the Dalkey Book Festival Emerging Writer Prize of the Year Award. It was shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize, the Costa Poetry Book Award, the Derek Walcott Prize for Poetry, and the Butler Literary Prize. She was the UCD Arts Council of Ireland Writer in Residence in 2023 and Poet in Residence at the Yeats Society in Sligo from 2022 to 2024. Her poems have appeared in Poetry Magazine, New England Review, PN Review, The Poetry Review, Poetry London, Poetry Ireland Review, The Stinging Fly, and elsewhere. Eggshell was a Poetry Book Society choice this year. And it is a collection of many different moments that make a life. Poems that herald a self-conquest, poems that are full of acceptance, acceptance of motherhood, of the speaker's spouses transitioning, of secondary infertility, of hurt, and mostly of change. It is a playful collection filled with playful form, sometimes a form so delicate that we are just afloat. It is a tactile and tangible collection of work. And if Eat or We Both Starve was a song of the body and a call to lay foundations, to make tunnels to escape hunger and build back to the self, egg, shell, with its swans and rams, birds and the sea, a child's vantage point, a mother's song. Eggs break and become broken shells that free shapes they had once restricted. This is a breaking apart collection, a collection that allowed in air that gave rise to forms becoming something new and beautiful. In Eggshell, I felt that these poems teach us, in our acceptance that things are as they are, what will be, will be. And it is work that allows us to glimpse the beauty in chance, as the speaker moves from grief into a light of sorts, new, sometimes harsh, but always illuminating. Fear and hesitation, rumination over missed potential is laid aside, and in place of understanding and deep reassurance. There is an intense beauty in the transformations, and this collection is deserving of every reader. It is as smart as it is poignant and painful, as funny as it is generous, and as generous as Victoria Kennefick is herself. I am very honoured to invite her now to read from the first section of her new collection.
Well, hello, everyone. Elaine, thank you so much for that gorgeous introduction. It's so wonderful that you agreed to celebrate Eggshell's arrival with me here online with Carcanet. I've always been such a huge, enormous fan of your work and of you as a person in every respect. So it just feels like a proper party and a proper celebration. And hello, everyone. And I'm so delighted you're here. Thank you for making the time this evening to spend with me and my new book. So I'm going to read from the first section of the book, just a few poems. The first section, Egg, explores, as Elaine mentioned in her beautiful introduction, secondary infertility and early motherhood, and that kind of difficult, complicated space where I think the female body is very much transformed from the body that certainly the speaker in these poems recognized and becomes a body that makes other bodies, and the responsibility and difficulty in that. I'm going to start by reading the first poem in the collection, Ram. So I used to live with someone who was a scientist, an ecologist, and so I never knew what would be there at home when I came back from work, various animal body parts and the like. So one day I came home and this is what I found. Ram. It's on the kitchen table, the ram's skull. He came in cradling it in his arms. Don't worry, it's been dead for ages, he whispered, then touched my cheek, a circuit forming between him, me, and the ram that flooded my body with crackling winter fire. He plonked the skull down before vanishing, as he does, into his head and left this head still on the wood, just bone and horns. And oh, what horns! I imagine his admirers' eyes, dark slits expanding to take them all in. The curve of them, looping, intentional things, rigid, strong. I can't look for long, can't reach out to touch them, though it's all I want to do. To be honest, I am scared of the narrow, brittle skull between two magnificent coronets, a sliver of bone, and in its empty sockets, a black blankness. It is the devil, no doubt, here on our kitchen table like a vase. It vibrates. I can almost hear its ancient beats. Every time I make tea, load the dishwasher, stack plates, it is there. Weird exhibit. I'll take it to show her, he says, when he returns, meaning our 2-year-old who has been asking about bones and smell death in the house. She runs in, her teething cheeks hot and red. Mama, the baba doesn't need its head anymore. The 3 of us and the ram. Its presence, a whisper from the future, stubborn, yes, and unapologetic. It's on the table even now. Tomorrow it will disappear to his laboratory, but tonight I can't stop thinking about those hollow orbs, the thin fragments of skull clinging together to give shape to an idea. Ram, silhouetted against all the objects, against all the light. Ram, who am I supposed to be in all this? The floral blinds, the recipe books, the porcelain floor tiles. Oh, Ram, let us bash our heads off them and weep. So much of the poems in the early section of this book relate to my daughter. And I suppose a lot of the poems are from her babyhood to maybe her young toddlerhood. And I haven't been able to really write about her since. And I think that's interesting. But this is one of the last poems that I wrote about her. And it was when we were baking together. And being not a natural domestic, I was really learning, I suppose, just as she was. Teaching my daughter how to break an egg. She hesitates. She who is told not to break, who is asked, did she break or why did she break? Go for it, I tell her. She looks at me and taps. Harder, I say. She laughs and raps. It shatters. Not a clean break, but tiny, catastrophic fissures, miniature tiles, a mosaic of destruction. Once more, and the insides spill out. The yolk is punctured and brilliant orange. We smile at each other. Her fingers are sticky. She hates that. I do too. We wash our hands together under the cold tap, wipe them dry on a tea towel. Now we make sure to stir the egg into the mixture so all the ingredients are indistinguishable. We plop it in the tin, the gloopy mess. Push it into the oven's hot womb. There, it will solidify into an edible brick for us to break again. But now, all I can say is, careful, careful you don't get burned. As Elaine mentioned, this book concerns secondary infertility, which is something I certainly had no idea about until it was suddenly very relevant to me. And I will give you a trigger warning because I know obviously miscarriage can be very difficult to be reminded of. So this poem is about my first miscarriage, and I suppose I named each of them, and there are 4 in the book. And this one is the longest one, and I think in many ways the most traumatic, but equally a fascinating experience to go through in many respects. Number 1, ivy. I once wore a wreath of ivy to ward off intoxication from alcohol and other dangers. I once wore a wreath of ivy to be closer to poetry as if it were a place. So when you came into being, little sprout, so loyal and eager, I could feel you immediately shoring me up from the inside. I was carrying the world, so fragile, this future predated by a timeline of cramps. Ivy in my wedding bouquet, gesturing to fidelity, which would turn out to be the least of my worries. Ivy looped and luscious around the trees that formed a guard of honour on the bus to Dublin on a school trip to the theatre. How glamorous. I stood in the gap between seats, making announcements, when there was a little shift, a little alteration. I couldn't rearrange my face, but kept a teacher's grin, breezy, breezy. Come on, everyone, line up in twos. That's what we do. Later, in the auditorium, lights down low, I scooched past students in the row propped on red velvet seats, then struggled through huge doors to the plush bathrooms, mirroring spots of scarlet on the spots of scarlet on my gusset, blood on the tissue. It was January, bleak and hollow. I was January, suffocated by ivy. It took 2 days. I even went to school. That's what we do. At the end, I put your big sister to bed, kissed her curls, took myself to give birth in a grave. Tears fell into the toilet too. Then I laughed at how pathetic I was and so alone. Winter ivy down the bowl. Here I am smashed on cold tiles, a broken cup, useless to you. Winter ivy, here I am drunk and stupid, trying to live in a poem, to hold words like pills. Winter ivy, you are choking me. You cannot hold anything, not even your father's hand. And this last one that I'm going to read from the first section is a little spiky. And maybe some of you are familiar with the interesting situation of being a woman of a certain age and being asked about when you're going to have children. And then when you do have a child, being asked when you're going to have another child. And I presume it continues until you have reached a point of having enough children that everyone approves, which I think must be 2 or 3. And then anything after that, perhaps people are like, when are you going to stop having children? I don't know, having not got there. But everyone has an opinion, that's for sure. So this was my response one day when I was asked again in playground, are you going to have another baby? I am that woman you're afraid of. My reptilian eyes dart to the plump face of your freshly born baby. Yes, I want it. My toddler skitters at my feet, recognizes the signs, the slowing of my heartbeat, the flick of my long, thin tongue. I don't want to pine. I want to die of longing for the doughy body of a toothless child clung to me, dribbling absolution down its double chins. Oh, let me take it. I'll tend it well. See, show off, dear, prance for the lady and the baby. Marvel at how efficiently, how quickly I made this child. All the other ones died. All the other ones died. I deserve another still warm crawling towards me on the mat. What do you think of that? You'll hardly miss this one. They say you'll still be a mother, and as old as you are, I'm sure you'll have another.
Hello.
Hi, Lane.
That was
Hi, girl.
Actually, as you were reading, all my questions went out the window, and I want to talk to Victoria about domesticity and how I think it's getting in the way of your like ancient madness that just rises up through you in these poems and seems to constantly contradict the mundane and the banal tasks you have to do. But I'll stick to my first question at least, and then we can go off script. Um, Actually, it's from number one, Ivy, and I was really struck by the lines. I once wore Wreath of Ivy to be closer to poetry as if it were a place. And when I read this in the collection, it got me thinking about the first time I met you was in Listowel at the Listowel Festival. And you had your chapbook out at the time. And it's just wonderful to see your journey to this place now after, you know, two amazingly successful collections. I'm wondering what that journey felt like to you, and if poetry was a tangible place when you were a child, and how it has it moved and changed, and what has it become, and what does it give you, if that makes sense, and what did writing this collection give you and take from you in some ways, because they always take something.
Doesn't everything always take something? That's a really beautiful question, because as I integrate poetry more and more into my everyday domestic life, in a sense, as it becomes part of that, I realize that I've always been living at least two lives in parallel. At the moment, I think I'm probably living, like most women, about 15 simultaneous lives. But poetry is a very, very significant place for me. And it always, always has been, from when I remember learning nursery rhymes. And I was very lucky to grow up in a house where my parents would recite poems by heart. And there were poetry books around the place. My dad was a great fan of Robert Service, and would recite all of his great epics with glee. Yeah, and he was such a great reciter of poetry, actually, and really enjoyed rhyme and puns, and playing around with words. And my mom was very much more into the romantic, Wordsworth and Keats and Yeats. And so I really feel that I found words, and I found words in the container of poetry to be a way of understanding the world that resonated with the way that my brain worked and the questions that I had. I had very many questions, I still do, about this whole situation. And I always took poetry really, really seriously, from as early as I could read and as early as I could write. And so that has always been path I have been walking on, with varying degrees of fear and anxiety and frustration and trepidation and joy and excitement, because it's something I've always done. So I think writing the chapbook and writing the books, there were a lot of times where it felt ridiculous to be getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning before work and writing poems that nobody was waiting for or was interested in. And yet it felt like an absolute compulsion and something I had to do. And I used to question it, and I question it less now. It's just something I have to do.
You said they're a container of words, and it just, again, I feel, and we had a very brief chat yesterday, Victoria and I, in the frantic way that we live our lives, in the busy. And I said, Elaine and Victoria tried to put form on our feelings since forever, you know. And I felt that we laughed about this, but I think that there might be something in that with regards to this collection and the form it takes, and we might talk about that in a few minutes. But that this container of words, and you're getting up in the morning at 6 o'clock, in a way to put a shape on your experience. And you say in Child of Lir, did I imagine my whole life? And that really, really struck me. And I wondered, in some ways, are you writing this to bear witness to, because they're very painful, and we'll get into the pain of the collection. They're painful poems, and I'm wondering, did you write them in real time as it was occurring? So it's divided into two sections. If you want to talk about that first, and then with regards to, were you putting a control on these out of control situations?
Yes, like so the book started off very much being about early motherhood and very much about secondary infertility, which took me took me by surprise. It's like just blew me out of the water. I was flabbergasted by it and that I was experiencing it and that it was something that was happening to so many people around me. And I was so naive about it and so clueless and angry about that in some way. And yet also going, did I want to know? Did I ever seek it out? Did I ever ask? And because I had a very, and still do, a very anxious relationship with reproduction and motherhood and child and what that means for women, and particularly when you want to move into a creative life and what that means having a child, children, complicates things massively in beautiful ways, but also quite difficult ways. So I think that I started off with that and very much with the idea of the egg and swans, because that was very much something that was around me at the time. And then when my former spouse came out as trans, that kind of broke something in the book, because I honestly thought, and this is no reflection on anything, and maybe a reflection on how weird my brain works, but I was like, oh, I thought secondary infertility would be the most difficult thing I would ever deal with. And like, look at this, life has now offered me this incredibly complex, confusing, very destabilizing experience around identity, which now I have to grapple with. And I wasn't kind of finished grappling with this previous experience. And how do I process them and accept them? And I think that's a huge part of the project. And it's really lovely that you mentioned it, because that is something that I think so many of the book or the poems are scrambling towards and trying to reach that level of like things as they are, and you as you are, and whatever feelings you are feeling, they are the feelings, and you can't really do anything about them other than let them pass through, which requires a certain level of awareness and space. So I think then the second part of the book, I did write in real time. I was very lucky to get 2 residencies, one in the top 3 actually, one in the Tyrone Guthrie Centre, one in Greywood in Killa in Cork, and one in the Centre Culturel Irlandais in Paris. And during that time, I worked on different sections of the book in a very intense way. I cried a lot. Yeah. And so I think that they are a way of working things out for me, and of putting shape to something that is so shapeless and nebulous and intangible and so difficult to communicate in a normal way, to just go, oh, hey, these are the weird existential identity crises I'm having. You know, it's much easier to put them in a poem for me.
But there's a huge generosity in this collection. I mean, I was really struck by sort of your magnanimous approach to the situation, and exactly what you said. I did feel that for you too, with regards to the infertility, and that it was so unexpected, obviously having had one child, and then you just expect, because we just expect that this is the path, right? Absolutely. And then of course it's not, and a lot of pain comes from not accepting the reality. And I really felt it's a very moving collection, in the sense that there's just a kind of a really beautiful acceptance of the aesthetic in every moment, whether it is a ram's head or pelvis of a sheep, or the swan in a moment, or the cracking of an egg, or just that I said it's quite a tactile collection. It's real, you know. But there is that sort of generosity, and you're quite humorous, but when you turn the humor, it's back on you, nailed to the cross a little. Not nailed to the cross, actually. You resist that. I love that poem. Victoria reenacts the Stations of the Cross. Well done. But, you know, I suppose you're fighting that idea of being nailed to the cross. You know, get down off the cross, we need the wood because we have to move on here, or we have to like stay in this. So you did say, but I did think of you on your residencies, and I did, you know, wonder like that intense loneliness, because there's a very strong loneliness in the collection. That's real gut-wrenching. And was that just a process you felt you wanted to go through? Not obviously you could not want to go through it. Sorry, I meant the residencies. I know what you mean.
I was loving it.
Yeah. You were having a great. No, but you know what I mean. I did. You know,
do. I really do. because it is a really lonely place. Loss is a really lonely place. Grief is a really lonely place because everyone experiences their own version of it, and you're losing a relationship, a situation, an experience, a person, but you're losing your version of it. So even if somebody's, you know, parent dies, all of those children are going to grieve that parent in a very different way because they all had a different relationship with that parent, and so on. So I do think there is an incredible loneliness in loss, and particularly I think in miscarriage and baby loss, especially when you don't meet the baby, because no one knows that this child existed or this possibility of a child existed unless you tell them in many cases, but your body does. Yeah. And your body goes into like, it's happening, and it has to kind of come down from that, which is really difficult. Especially if you already are, like, I think as many women have a wonderful time being pregnant, and that's wonderful. I didn't, and I didn't enjoy any of the experiences related to it. So I think I'm really interested in loneliness as an experience. And I'm really interested in how we can very easily, because of our beautiful egos who are only trying to protect us, how we can maybe put ourselves in the position of being a victim to circumstance. And that can be a very, very dark and lonely place. And it can be also a place of great helplessness. I do think it is part of the process that you do have to occasionally have a why me, for me moment. Yeah. But equally, it's essential, in fact. But equally, whenever I had one of those, there was always a voice at the back of my head making fun of me. And on some level, while that undercuts a lot of the tension for me, it was an essential part, I think, of my my getting over myself and the situation and accepting things. Because on a certain level, it was a beautiful experience. And on a certain level, it was a ridiculous experience. Yeah. No, and on a certain level, it was a devastating experience. So just trying to be, I suppose, very aware of all of the different layers of experience that any situation can bring.
Yeah, and I think that that's the balance in the collection, is that you are constantly balancing that. But that doesn't surprise me, Victoria the person or Victoria the poet. You do that in all your work, I feel, and that's where there's a lot of beauty lies in that. But I do just want to remark that a lot of the poems I felt around the maternity wards and, you know, miscarriage in the first half, you were alone in those moments, which was deeply moving but profoundly affecting as well, because we are individuals, and if we look at the egg, we come into this world on our own and we leave on our own, and that's what the collection really gives. And maybe not to be afraid of that journey and just accept it. But I'll stop talking because this is your launch, and I want you to read from the second part, if that's okay, because the clock is flying and we could talk forever.
I know it really is.
So Shell.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Elaine, because actually that's something I think the collection really does grapple with, that sense of wanting a connection, but equally being alone. So I think I'm back again. Hi. So yes, I'm going to read from the second part of the collection, which I suppose explores the experience of a former spouse transitioning, and very much focusing on the wife or the speaker's experience of that in relation to how she feels about it, as opposed to the person who's transitioning, because that is very much obviously their own story. So I'm going to start, I spoke about ego a minute ago, and I'm going to start with a poem about ego, which I think egos get an unfair rap in many respects, because they are only trying to, here we go. The ego is crushed like a snail shell under a stiletto and is begrudgingly divested of its own smugness. When you slipped out of your skin, you slip of a thing. The skin I thought I knew you in, it was dazzling and terrifying. How I too had to slough wifehood off my dry arms, scrub it from my violently blue-white legs, exfoliate its unmistakable musk. You were no more my husband than any other woman. What a thing to miss. And yet, and yet I tried to imagine clinging to you like a 1980s polyester nightie sparking in the dark, for God's sake. Images of bodies reaching over the mantelpiece and going up in flames, people chimneys burned on my child brain. Maybe I could do it and clutch all that we made tightly until my fists shook. Stupid, smug, ego snail. Who am I now without you but what I have always been? A white feather in the wind. I told you that when we met and you cupped me in your hands loosely, and the wind could blow at any gale, get knotted, and sure I'd toss a bit and shiver, but I could mull that over in the dark, in the dark, in the dark. Did you know? Did you know, they all ask, questions like prodding fingers. Have they stripped their spouse's skin clean? Have they watched something fall away? A lie? No. A pretense? No. A realization? Yes. An epiphany? Definitely. What a ridiculous question, though. When you didn't know and dressed as best you could in what you thought you should. We were just playing, I suppose, until it was clear that it was serious as murder. The end of us, I mean. The dream of us. Not your slinky escape from your chrysalis. Not your beautiful fluttering into the light. This is a very short poem, and there are a few very short poems in the collection. I am a fan. And during lockdown, my daughter used the bed as really anything other than a place of sleep. And I mean my bed. So it was a ship, it was a trampoline, it was a picnic area. So I decided to treat myself to a Super King bed once lockdown was over. And having never seen a Super King bed in a domestic setting before, I was alarmed by its vastness and had this rather bizarre hallucination, I suppose you could call it. Super King. There is a corpse on our bed. It is Jesus, down from the cross, the blood spattered across his rippling torso, the crown of thorns ripping the pillow slip and the flesh on his forehead. I don't know why he is here with that heart exposed, his eyes closed. He is dead, I think. But you know how men can be. They say one thing and the next thing you know, they're on the road showing off their open wounds while back at home, the women weep. I read a lot about swans for this collection. I kind of have that tendency when I'm writing of extreme research, and it takes you to very strange places. And this poem is inspired by a newspaper article that I saw about a swan in Germany. To the swan that has fallen in love with a pedal boat in Germany. It is not your typical love story, you must admit. I've seen the news report, you're famous, and watched how you bizarrely named Black Peter. I'm sorry, how rude. It's a lovely, appropriate name for a Black female swan. I've got it bad. It must have been some spring. No wonder you refused to fly south. I'll be honest, he's easy on the eye if you ignore the two humans pedaling furiously, and he's almost 6 feet high. The owner of your love has agreed to relocate you both to a zoo for the winter months. An unusual match, the news reporter said, but they seem to be enjoying their new home. Black Peter. Never did I think I would understand. I wintered with a man shape, beautiful girl hidden inside, steering away, screaming, and I didn't hear a thing. So Elaine mentioned me crucifying myself, which is something that I seem to enjoy doing and exploring. So this, I suppose, is one of those attempts to look at the brighter side of one's more challenging experiences in life. Victoria reenacts the Stations of the Cross, don't we all? 1. Victoria is condemned to the truth. There is no way around it. 2. She is made to bear this cross and develops TMJ. 3. Victoria falls the first time down the stairs, spilling coffee all over herself. 4. She tells her mother about her marriage, her broken marriage. 5. Victoria's family and friends are made to bear the cross by listening to her process this information. They are sainted. 6. Her sister wipes her face and tells her to brush her teeth and be in bed by 10 p.m. She does not drink enough water. 7. Victoria falls the second time, the stairs again, I swear, and must go to A&E. He is fine. The doctor was fine. 8. She goes for dinner with the girls and cries twice. They do not roll their eyes. 9. Victoria falls the third time. This is getting ridiculous. 10. She is scared to get rid of the male clothes and old baby clothes stuffed secretly into drawers, to say goodbye to an imagined life. Instead, she buys herself new clothes in sizes she does not approve of. They fall out of the wardrobe like dead bodies. 11. Victoria is nailed to the cross, or rather, she nails herself. 12. She dies many times over. This is the truth, you see. 13. Victoria takes herself down from the cross. 14. She lies on her bed alone and sighs. In 3 days, she will take up Pilates. And this is the last poem in the collection and the last poem that I'm going to read for you this evening. And I just want to thank you all again for being here, and to Elaine for making this such a special evening, and everyone at Carcanet for always supporting me and bringing my books into the world, especially my editor, John McAuliffe. To everyone who supported the book from the Arts Council here in Ireland, who've been wonderful, and all my friends and family who are endlessly understanding and supportive and loving, and especially to my little girl, who really is just the biggest legend in the world. Swan Song. It's nighttime. We hold hands, peer into the hole we dug together. Into it, we place our marriage, the full shape of it moonshiny. An egg, the seed we have tended for so long, now we must bury it. We are both crying, of course, but it must be done. We pat the earth with the flat of our hands, imagining each other's backs, a bald, featherless patch on the grass. You sing, even so, our little song. The mute swans stay mute. Thank you.
Fantastic. That was just, I'm blown away. And I suppose I was really struck when you were reading to mention that there's huge power to your voice, and that, you know, while you're generous of spirit, you hold your space in these poems as well. And the religious iconography and culture that we both can't escape, and our generation of poets can't escape it, but you use it to great effect, I feel, and re-own it in a kind of a very strong feminist way, which I'm interested in. And just to note that Easter eggs make it into both collections. So I thought that was quite fascinating.
I'm obsessed with Easter, I think, really.
I think so. Well, it's the
Yeah.
rebirth, maybe.
Yes,
Is there
yes,
a
yeah, and the many deaths and the many versions of ourselves that we go through, and it is something we very much share, Elena, and that's so palpable in your poetry as well. And I've been thinking so much about it because, you know, it's such a strange thing to be exposed to from such an early age, this radically elaborate, violent, extreme dramatic language. And you know, going to the benediction, looking at the Stations of the Cross, people being like, you know, flagellated and starved. And, you know, I remember a particular story. Yeah, the dragon trying to eat baby Jesus as Mary's given birth in space or something.
I shouldn't laugh. I shouldn't laugh, but it was. But...
yeah, it's just such an insane story. So that has obviously has a massive impact on, I think, our very early understanding of what language is and what it can do and where you can go with it.
I think that you have this aesthetic palette of childhood especially for the poet, and you go back and you draw from it and you draw from it, which was why I was so interested in you saying a container, and you know, for better or worse, it is formed in us, and you know, we go back to it all the time. But I am conscious that I really want to open this up to the audience, because it's been wonderful to have so many participants. So if anyone has a question at the moment, I'm going to ask Victoria one last question, and I hope she laughs and doesn't take it too seriously. But if you want to put in any questions into the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen, I think it's at the bottom of your screen. This is her amazing collection, Eggshell. It's astonishingly good, and I'm so proud to launch it for her. But I was listening to some interviews, and I read somewhere that Victoria Kennefick, I can't remember now where, you know, I went on the Vanta black hole of the internet, is a bold poet. And I thought, oh my God, will we ever not be bold or unapologetically feminist or unapologetic with using her words? And I was like, I wonder what she'll think of being a bold poet. Like, because going back to the religious influences and cultures, we were meant to be good girls. You know, the Virgin Mary was we to be this. Like, I failed miserably at that very young age, but so I had to give up. But the other girls went for it, you know, in the convent. But anyway, how about the bold poet tag? How do you feel about it?
It is hilarious. It is hilarious, and I feel in some way the same about brave.
Yeah.
Because I think really all I'm doing is just bearing witness in some weird way, as we're all doing, to the experience of being human, and particularly in my case and in our case, being just happened to be born female and happen to have this female body, and therefore have a very particular experience of being human, and very biological. And I think being honest and open about that, which is sometimes challenging and goes against a lot of what I was taught in school and through my faith anyways, it just feels necessary and hopefully helpful in some way, because I was helped by those women before us, like Plath and Evan Boland and Anne Sexton, who just said it out. Like, I'll never forget reading Plath when I was like maybe 13 or 14 and almost looking around going, how is she allowed?
Yeah. How is she allowed? Yeah.
And I'm constantly coming up against, am I allowed? As I'm writing, actually. And even when I'm reading aloud, I'm like, am I really allowed to say this? And there's something like absolutely delightful about going, yes, I am, because I'm giving myself the permission, because this is what's happened to me. And it might have happened to you, and me saying it might help you in some way, or might give someone else a different perspective on someone in their lives that has happened to. So it's just, I think
shared human experience of loss and loneliness. Yeah. And I think it's breaking ground still. We're still breaking ground. And like, it's interesting to hear you say that, because, you know, it harks of still self-questioning, which, you know, we both do and we will, but hopefully, you know, we'll move away from that in the poetry and move on from, you know, and feel that you can take up space with your words and your experience, and it's valid and wonderful, and your art is superb. Let's open this Q&A box. Okay. Robert says, thanks for a great reading. I haven't read your collection yet, but wonder how you dealt or are dealing with the ethical dilemmas of publishing poems that circle around a spouse's transitioning.
Excellent question, Robert. And my dad was called Robert and my nephew's called Robert. So it's a very special name for me. I think I was scared. I'm not going to lie. I found it a scary prospect. And I spoke to my co-parent, who has been incredibly generous and very understanding, as she has always been about my work, and giving me a huge amount of encouragement and space and time to explore it. And really, I think what I chose to do, and really the only thing that I could do and wanted to do, was focus on the experience of someone when someone else is changing, and this person doesn't have any control over that. And in one sense, it just happens in this case to be a transition, a gender transition. But but equally, I think it's applicable to any change that anyone in our lives makes that we don't necessarily have any input in. You know, somebody leaves the marriage for other reasons. Somebody decides to change jobs. Somebody decides to take up, you know, mountain climbing and goes to climb Everest. Someone decides to do deep sea diving. Whatever it is, there's like always having to negotiate yourself in relation to another person if you are in a relationship with them. And that kind of how you define yourself in relation to them. And that was a really interesting one for me because I didn't realize how I had really taken on wife as a role. And I liked it. Like I liked being a wife. I liked that identity. It felt safe and comfortable. And obviously comes with a lot of other types of baggage too, but there was something really, really comfortable and enduring about it. And then having that whole notion taken and dismantled, that's what I was interested in exploring. So I'm very much hoping, and I did have a sensitivity reader as well, which I was very, very grateful for. Dr. H. Gareth Gavin in Manchester, who read the book from that perspective. And I think it is as honest and as self-aware as it possibly can be in terms of it being very much one person's experience of watching someone they care about change in a way that is out of their control and is not something that they necessarily want to or would choose to happen, and what happens to you in relation to that. A lot about acceptance and so on. So yeah, I grappled a lot with it and worked really hard on making sure that it was fair and kind and compassionate and loving.
Yeah, the poems really alerted me to sort of, you know, the sadness in life's changes, but the opportunities as well, and very much balanced in that way, I think, from your perspective. Thank you. Adrian asks, I love the way that the two halves of the book seem to talk to each other, that the egg can mean one thing in the first half around pregnancy and fertility, but it also has a distinct meaning for trans people too, that they often refer, and I've heard you say this also, Victoria, to their pre-transition selves as themselves being an egg. Could you say a little bit perhaps about how you found the poems talking to each other as you worked on the collection and the two halves? And that maybe...
That's a great question. And thank you so much. I remember realizing that I had to write about this experience and that it had to be part of this book, and that this book was not going to be just about what I thought it was going to be about, basically. And there was something about having that crack in it, and not even in the center, but like a crack that's slightly off center, that suddenly became very important and very essential, because that's what it felt like you're living in an egg and you're living in a very whole contained environment, and then suddenly this crack and everything kind of falls out, and you don't know what's going to emerge from that crack. So I think there was a great joy in my heart when I realized that pre-transition people, or before, I suppose, trans people have that epiphany that they call themselves eggs, which I think is adorable. I think it's a brilliant way of describing it. And it really helped me actually understand that process a little bit, because there is breakage, there is a bit of a mess, and it can be quite a pleasant mess, or, you know, it doesn't have to be a catastrophic mess, but it's a bit messy, and then something emerges that is beautiful and different and bigger than what was there before. And that really, really helped me. So I really moved even further into the whole metaphor and symbol of the image of the egg, because of that realization that, you know, to crack your egg is to realize that you're trans. And I felt like, you know, something had been cracked in me through my experiences of miscarriage, and this felt like a cracking in me as well. And it was really the sense that I think when anyone changes, everyone changes.
Yeah.
Because we're also interconnected and interdependent in ways that we don't even realize until somebody changes and you have a reaction to that. And so I think that's what the poems are kind of talking to each other about, maybe about different themes or specifics, but ultimately that sense of transformation and growth. I hope that answers your question.
Fantastic. And a last one from the wonderful Jessica Trainer, another wonderful
Yes.
poet. Hi, Jess. I love the use of form throughout the collection and how it mirrors content so beautifully. Did the poems fall onto the page this way, or did you find they morphed into these wonderful concrete shapes as you edited? And there's a real strong concrete poem vibe to the collection. So great question, Jess.
Excellent. Yeah. Thanks, Jess. I think a little bit of both. Some of them came out like that ego shell poem, that ego snail, came out in that weird kind of lanterny shape. And it felt kind of awkward and centered, and it wanted to kind of be in the middle, and I just let it. And then there were more, I suppose, intentional ones. Like there's a poem, Bjork on Bjork's swan dress, which I was like, I'm going to move that into the shape. Very briefly, for fun as well. So I think each poem had its own. I had a conversation with it about like what shape it would like, and some they told me as they do, as they were happening in a sense, and then others it kind of came afterwards. But I think sometimes the form and shape of the poem, I think all the time, is, the vessel that makes the poem more accessible or palatable, or gives another angle at which to approach it. And some of the poems I think that I found harder to write, sometimes the form helped, I think, in getting around that or moving through that as well.
The husband suit is one of my favorite for form. It's fantastically done and just, yeah, beautiful. I think that's all our questions from the Q&A, but I am conscious that there are gorgeous comments in the chat. So this is your launch, so I will read just one or two of them. It's really important. Deeply moving, beautifully crafted. Thank you, Victoria, from Kathleen. Wonderful reading and a great collection from Bert, to everyone. Thank you, Victoria. I loved reading Eggshell and loved hearing you read from the collection even more. What extraordinary, beautiful and fierce poems. So I think we will be finishing up. We'll leave it there, but I want to say, Victoria, these are vital poems. Poetry is very important, I think, now more than ever. And making art and making art from our experience. And thank you, like I said, for your generosity of spirit in this collection. So it's been wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. It was really just a joy, and I can't wait to see you in real life and wet the baby's head.
Let's do it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for being here and for the lovely questions, the lovely comments.
Yes. Thank you.
It really does.
Thank you both so much. And thank you guys for your amazing comments and your great questions. I have put the link in the chat for you, but I can see the chat is still going. So do check your emails tomorrow. You've got a discount code so you can get a copy of the book with £2 off. Please do use it, and email me if you have any problems getting there. So yeah, congratulations, Victoria. It was so moving. I was so glad my camera was off. I was literally sobbing at the end of some poems. So I was like, thank God I'm off screen. Yeah, huge congratulations, and thank you both so much for this evening. It's been a real pleasure. Please join us again next time. Our next launch is next week. We're resurrecting Bunny Lang, from the New York School, a woman New York School poet, edited by Rosa Campbell. That's in the chat for you too, and it's all on the website. So that's everything. Thanks again, and well done, and goodbye.
Thank you. Good night.